Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in American history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the bitter cold of December 1943, a military convoy of 3 transport trucks departed from Camp Forest, Tennessee, carrying 30 German prisoners of war. The trucks were scheduled to arrive at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri before dawn. Military police escorts confirmed the departure, prisoner manifests were signed, and the convoy disappeared into the night. 4 hours later, the convoy arrived at its destination. But when the rear doors were opened, military personnel were confronted with an inexplicable sight. All 3 trucks were completely empty. No prisoners, no signs of escape, no evidence of what transpired during those 4 hours on isolated Ozark mountain roads. This incident was quickly classified and buried in military archives until 1968, when a former MP officer broke his silence. What happened during that midnight journey has never been fully explained, and the fate of those 30 men remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries from the American home front during World War II. The convoy's route that night took them through some of the most isolated terrain in the American Midwest. A journey through winding mountain roads, small suspicious towns still harboring Civil War grudges, and stretches of uninhabited forest where a man could disappear without trace. The official explanation suggested the prisoners had orchestrated a sophisticated escape, but those familiar with the case knew better. The locked trucks showed no signs of forced entry. The convoy never reported stopping. And perhaps most disturbing of all, not a single prisoner was ever recaptured or seen again. Camp Forest, Tennessee had been established as one of the primary POW facilities in the United States. By 1943, it housed over 20,000 prisoners, primarily Germans captured in North Africa and Italy. The camp operated with remarkable efficiency, its population growing steadily as the Allies gained momentum in Europe. Located approximately 70 miles southeast of Nashville, the sprawling facility was considered a model POW camp, adhering strictly to Geneva Convention guidelines. The camp itself was a converted National Guard training facility, hastily expanded in 1941 to accommodate the growing number of enemy combatants being shipped to America. The ground stretched across 85,000 acres of Tennessee woodland, with the prison compound occupying the central 200 acres. Wooden barracks, originally built for American troops, were repurposed to house the prisoners. Guard towers dotted the perimeter at 200-yard intervals. Double fences of barbed wire, standing 12 feet high, encircled the entire compound. Despite these security measures, Camp Forest was not designed as a high-security facility. The remote location and the cooperative nature of most German prisoners made escape attempts rare. The camp commandant, Colonel Richard Donovan, ran a disciplined but fair operation. According to camp records, he insisted that prisoners be treated in strict accordance with international law, a position that sometimes put him at odds with locals who resented seeing Nazis receiving decent treatment while American boys were dying overseas. Donovan maintained that proper treatment of POWs reflected American values and might encourage reciprocal treatment for American prisoners in German hands. Lieutenant Colonel Walter Hoffman oversaw prisoner transfers at Camp Forest. According to military records, Hoffman was a meticulous administrator who personally approved all transfer manifests. On December 12, 1943, he signed off on Transfer Order 173C, authorizing the movement of 30 prisoners to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, approximately 330 miles northwest of Camp Forest. The transfer was designated as routine prisoner reassignment for labor allocation. Hoffman's personal log, discovered among his effects after his death in 1957, contained a curious notation regarding Transfer Order 173C. The entry, dated December 11, 1943, read, "Request from Dept. W for specific prisoners. Unusual selection criteria. Referred to callers Donovan for approval." The reference to Dept W has never been conclusively identified. No such department existed in the official military organization chart for 1943. Colonel Donovan apparently approved the transfer despite the unusual nature of the request. His official log contains only a standard notation, Transfer Order 173 EOC, approved per protocol. However, his widow later claimed that on the evening of December 12th, he had commented to her that he was uneasy about tonight's transfer, but did not elaborate further. The weather that evening was reported as clear but unseasonably cold, with temperatures hovering around 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Roads were icy but passable. The convoy was scheduled to depart at 23 hours, traveling through the night to minimize the risk of escape attempts or civilian contact. 3 standard Army M35 transport trucks were assigned, each carrying 10 prisoners under guard. The convoy would be led by a jeep carrying the commanding officer, Captain Malcolm Reeves, with a second jeep bringing up the rear. Captain Reeves was a 34-year-old career officer from Knoxville, Tennessee. His service record indicated a competent but unremarkable career. He had been assigned to Camp Forrest in June 1943 after recovering from wounds sustained during the Sicily campaign. His performance evaluations described him as reliable, thorough, and by the book. There was nothing in his background to suggest he would soon be at the center of one of the war's most baffling incidents. According to surviving documentation, the prisoners selected for transfer were unremarkable. Most were Wehrmacht soldiers captured during the North African campaign. None were officers or individuals designated as high-security risks. Their ages ranged from 19 to 42. The majority had been model prisoners who worked in camp maintenance or agricultural details. Nothing in their records suggested they were plotting escape or posed any particular threat. A deeper examination of the prisoner manifest, conducted years later by independent researchers, revealed subtle connections that weren't immediately apparent. 23 of the 30 men had been processed through the same POW transit facility in Oran, Algeria, before being shipped to the United States. 17 had served under the same battalion commander, Major Klaus Werner, who was killed during the Battle of Kasserine Pass. And perhaps most significantly, 11 of them had listed the same civilian occupation prior to military service: mining. This last detail might have seemed inconsequential in 1943. In retrospect, some historians have suggested it might explain why these particular prisoners were selected for transfer to Fort Leonard Wood. The fort was located near substantial mineral deposits, and POW labor was commonly used for mining operations deemed too dangerous or difficult to attract civilian workers. Camp records indicate that prisoner head count was conducted at 2245. All 30 men were present and accounted for. They were loaded into the transport trucks at 2250. The trucks were secured at 2257. Captain Reeves signed the final departure authorization at 2303. According to the logbook, the convoy passed through the main gate at 2307, exactly on schedule. An MP at the main gate, Private Clarence Wilkins, later recalled that the prisoners appeared unusually quiet during loading. In a statement given during the subsequent investigation, Wilkins noted, "Usually the Krauts talk among themselves when they're being moved. These fellows were dead silent, staring straight ahead. I remember thinking it was odd at the time. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the normalcy that preceded it. The Camp Forrest routine operated like clockwork on December 12th, just as it had for hundreds of previous prisoner transfers. The banality of the preparation stands in stark contrast to what would transpire over the next 4 hours. The projected route would take the convoy northwest along what is now U.S. Route 41, then west on State Highway 24, followed by a series of less-traveled roads cutting through the Ozark Mountains. The journey was estimated to take approximately 4 hours under optimal conditions, which would place their arrival at Fort Leonard Wood around 03 west on December 13th. The route had been carefully selected to avoid major population centers. In 1943, anti-German sentiment was running high, and the military was cautious about exposing German prisoners to civilian populations. The winding back roads through the Ozarks offered minimal chance of civilian contact. However, these same roads presented their own challenges: narrow lanes, sharp curves, and limited visibility, particularly dangerous under winter conditions. The convoy consisted of 5 vehicles total. The lead jeep, carrying Captain Reeves and his driver, Private First Class Daniel Morris, 3 transport trucks, each with a driver and armed guard, and the rear jeep with Staff Sergeant William Hargrove and Private Joseph Danzig. 8 American military personnel total, responsible for 30 German prisoners. The drivers were all experienced with the route, having made similar transfers in the past. The guards were armed with standard-issue M1911 pistols and M1 carbines. Each had been briefed on protocol in case of escape attempts, though such events were rare. German POWs in America generally recognized that escape was futile. Where would they go in a country uniformly hostile to them, thousands of miles from home? The night shift supervisor at Fort Leonard Wood, Major Robert Ellington, noted in his log that he received a routine radio check from the convoy at 01:15, reporting all was proceeding as planned. This would be the last communication received from Captain Reeves. The convoy was approximately at the halfway point of their journey near the small town of Licking, Missouri. Licking was a farming community of fewer than 1,000 residents. In 1943, it consisted of little more than a main street with a general store, post office, and gas station, all of which would have been closed at that hour. The convoy would have passed through without stopping, the rumble of military vehicles a brief interruption in the night's silence. According to meteorological records, the temperature continued to drop throughout the night, reaching 7 degrees Fahrenheit by 02 Walshoa. There was no precipitation, but frost was heavy, creating hazardous driving conditions on the narrow mountain roads. The moon was in its first quarter, providing minimal illumination. Local lore would later suggest that December 13, 1943, had been marked by unusual atmospheric conditions throughout the Ozarks. Several farmers reported unusual lights in the sky, dismissed at the time as reflections from military aircraft on training exercises. A weather station in Rolla documented an unexpected drop in barometric pressure around 01:30, followed by a rapid return to normal levels by 02 Westry. These anomalies were not connected to the convoy incident until years later. Fort Leonard Wood's main gate logged the convoy's arrival at 03:12 on December 13, 1943. This was within the expected time frame, suggesting the journey had proceeded without significant delay. The vehicles pulled into the designated receiving area at 03:17. Major Ellington and a detail of 6 MPs were waiting to process the incoming prisoners. What happened next would defy explanation for decades. When the rear doors of the first transport truck were unlocked and swung open, Major Ellington was confronted with an empty cargo area. The interior was precisely as it should be, benches along each side securing chains bolted to the floor, but completely devoid of prisoners. Thinking there had been some confusion about prisoner allocation, Ellington proceeded to the second truck. It, too, was empty. So was the third. According to Ellington's report, he immediately questioned Captain Reeves, who appeared disoriented and uncomprehending. Reeves insisted that all 30 prisoners had been loaded at Camp Forest and that the convoy had made no stops during the journey. The truck drivers and guards corroborated this account. None of them could explain the prisoners' absence. Ellington's report, partially declassified in 1976, contained an observation that was redacted from most copies. Captain Reeves and his men exhibit signs of shock consistent with traumatic experience. All appear physically unharmed but display marked confusion and temporal disorientation. Captain Reeves repeatedly asked what time it was, appearing surprised at the answer each time it was provided. Fort Leonard Wood was immediately placed on lockdown. A perimeter search was initiated, operating under the assumption that somehow Impossibly, 30 prisoners had escaped from 3 separate locked vehicles while in transit. No evidence of escape was found. The surrounding roads were searched for any signs of prisoners on foot. Local law enforcement was notified to be on alert for German soldiers. Nothing was found. The interior of each transport truck was meticulously examined. The locks were intact. The securing chain showed no signs of tampering. There were no cuts in the canvas coverings. No tools were found that could have been used to facilitate an escape. The only notable abnormality was that the interior temperature of each truck was measured at 34 degrees Fahrenheit, significantly warmer than the outside temperature, suggesting the trucks had indeed been occupied during the journey. A more puzzling discovery, not mentioned in the official report but later revealed by one of the investigating MPs, was that the interior of each truck smelled strongly of ozone, the sharp electric scent that follows lightning strikes. This detail was apparently deemed insignificant at the time, as it offered no obvious clue to the prisoners' whereabouts. Each member of the convoy was separately interrogated. Their accounts were consistent to a degree that investigators found troubling. None reported any unusual occurrences during the journey. None could identify any point at which the prisoners could have escaped. When pressed about potential stops or moments when the trucks were unattended, all 8 men maintained that the convoy had traveled continuously from Camp Forest to Fort Leonard Wood. Private First Class Morris, Captain Reeves's driver, did note one peculiarity. Approximately 2 hours into the journey around Owanborn, the convoy passed through a stretch of road near Mark Twain National Forest where a dense fog had settled. Morris reported that visibility was reduced to less than 10 feet for a stretch of approximately 1 mile. He recalled that radio communication between vehicles was briefly interrupted during this period. However, the convoy maintained visual contact and continued without stopping. Morris's statement included a detail that was initially overlooked. The fog didn't behave like normal fog. It was too dense, too uniform, and it ended abruptly, like hitting a wall. One minute we couldn't see, the next it was clear as anything. Never seen anything like it before or since. The third truck driver, Corporal Frank Mahoney, provided similar testimony, but added an observation about the prisoners during this foggy stretch. I couldn't see them, of course, I was driving, but I could hear them through the partition. They were speaking German, real quiet-like. Then they all went silent at once. All at the same time, like someone had flipped a switch. Gave me the creeps, if I'm being honest. By dawn on December 13th, a full-scale manhunt was underway. Military police, local sheriff's departments, and civilian volunteers combed the area between Camp Forest and Fort Leonard Wood. Roadblocks were established on all major highways. Trains were searched. Bus stations were monitored. The FBI was notified of what was being treated as the largest mass escape of enemy prisoners on American soil during the war. Days passed, then weeks. Not a single prisoner was located. No civilian reported encountering a German soldier. No unusual activity was noted in any of the small towns along the convoy route. It was as if 30 men had simply vanished into the cold December air. The investigation was complicated by wartime security concerns. The military was reluctant to publicize the disappearance, fearing it would undermine public confidence in the POW system, or, worse, inspire copycat escape attempts. The manhunt continued, but with decreasing intensity as it became clear that conventional search methods were proving fruitless. A military inquiry was convened on December 27, 1943. Captain Reeves and his men were subjected to intense scrutiny. Suspicion initially fell on the possibility of negligence or even complicity in the escape. However, all 8 men passed polygraph examinations. Their service records were impeccable. None had any connections to German-American communities or displayed pro-German sympathies. The inquiry concluded that they were telling the truth as they understood it. They had transported 30 prisoners from Camp Forest, made no stops, and arrived at Fort Leonard Wood with empty trucks. The inquiry also ruled out the possibility that the prisoners had never been loaded at Camp Forest. Multiple witnesses had observed the loading process. The prisoner manifest had been signed by both American and German representatives as required by Geneva Convention protocols. The suggestion that 30 men had been deliberately disappeared by the military was considered and rejected as inconsistent with established procedures and ethical standards. One avenue of investigation focused on the possibility that the convoy had been intercepted by German sympathizers or saboteurs. The FBI pursued this angle, examining known German-American Bund activities in the region. This theory lost credibility when it became clear that no civilian vehicles had been observed along the route, and the convoy personnel unanimously maintained they had encountered no other traffic. The official investigation remained active until February 1944, when it was abruptly classified by direct order from the Department of War. All records were sealed. The 8 convoy personnel were reassigned to different facilities across the country. They were ordered never to discuss the incident, even among themselves. The case of the 30 missing prisoners was officially designated as an unsolved escape. For 24 years, the incident remained buried in classified military archives. The war ended. Camp Forest was decommissioned in 1946. Fort Leonard Wood continued operations as a major training facility. The small stretch of Ozark Mountain Road where the convoy had passed through fog became part of the expanded interstate highway system. Life moved on, and the mystery of what happened on that December night seemed destined to remain unsolved. Then, in 1968, former Staff Sergeant William Hargrove broke his silence. Hargrove, who had been riding in the rear Jeep during the convoy, gave an interview to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Now a 53-year-old hardware store owner in Carbondale, Illinois, Hargrove claimed he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wanted to clear his conscience before he died. According to the newspaper account, Hargrove stated that the official report of the incident was incomplete. He claimed that the convoy had indeed made one unscheduled stop, approximately 17 miles east of Rolla, Missouri. Around 01:20, the lead Jeep had suddenly pulled over on a deserted stretch of road. Captain Reeves had gotten out and appeared to be listening intently. When Hargrove approached him, Reeves reportedly said, "Do you hear that? Something's wrong with the prisoners." Hargrove claimed that he and Reeves had opened the rear door of the first truck and found the prisoners sitting silently on the benches, apparently unaware of the stop. However, all 30 men had a strange, vacant expression. None responded when addressed. After observing them for approximately 2 minutes, Reeves ordered the truck closed and the convoy to continue. The most disturbing part of Hargrove's account concerned what allegedly happened next. According to his statement, approximately 10 minutes after resuming their journey, the convoy entered an unusually dense patch of fog. Visibility dropped to 0. Radio contact between vehicles was lost. Hargrove claimed that he heard a high-pitched sound that he initially attributed to radio interference. "It got louder and louder," he told the reporter, "like nothing I'd ever heard before or since. It was inside my head somehow. I saw lights through the fog, moving lights like spotlights, but there was nothing up there for them to be attached to. The next thing I knew, we were out of the fog. The sound was gone, and it was 20 minutes later, according to my watch." That's when Captain Reeves radioed back to check on the prisoners. The guards reported everything normal. But when we got to Fort Leonard Wood, the trucks were empty. To this day, I don't know what happened in those 20 minutes. Hargrove's account was dismissed by military authorities, who pointed out that it contradicted his own sworn testimony from 1943. They suggested his recollection had been altered by time and his medical condition. Hargrove died 3 months after the interview was published. The story generated brief interest, but was ultimately filed away as the unreliable memories of a dying man. However, Hargrove's interview prompted others to come forward. A local resident named Elmer Whitfield contacted the Post-Dispatch with a curious account. In December 1943, Whitfield had been a 16-year-old living on his family's farm near the town of Salem, Missouri, directly on the convoy's route. Around 1:30 a.m. on December 13th, he had been awakened by the sound of multiple vehicles passing slowly on the road that ran adjacent to their property. Curious, he had looked out his bedroom window and observed what appeared to be a military convoy, 2 jeeps and 3 trucks. What caught his attention was that the convoy was traveling without headlights despite the darkness. Even more strange was that the vehicles appeared to be surrounded by what he described as a kind of glow, which he had attributed at the time to moonlight, reflecting off frost. But the thing is, Whitfield told the reporter, there wasn't much moon that night, and the glow moved with the vehicles. It wasn't like reflection at all. It was like they were driving through something, or something was moving with them. I watched until they disappeared around the bend. I remember checking the time because it was so strange. It was exactly 1:36 a.m. Whitfield's account might have been dismissed as the imagination of a teenager were it not for one detail that gave investigators pause. In 1943, the road that passed by the Whitfield farm was a minor county route that did not appear on most maps. It was not part of the convoy's official itinerary. If Whitfield had indeed seen the convoy, it meant that at some point Captain Reeves had deviated significantly from the designated route. The question, of course, was why. One possible explanation was that Reeves had encountered road conditions that forced a detour. However, weather records indicated no significant precipitation or other obstacles that would have made the main route impassable. Another possibility was that Reeves had deliberately chosen an alternate route to avoid potential security risks. But if so, why wasn't this decision documented in his report or mentioned during the investigation? A third, more troubling possibility emerged, that Reeves and his men had no memory of the detour. If Hargrove's account of missing time was accurate, it suggested that the convoy personnel might have experienced some form of shared amnesia or disorientation. This would explain the consistency of their testimony. They were telling the truth as they recalled it, but their recollections were incomplete. In April 1969, a history professor from the University of Missouri named Dr. Thomas Blackwood began researching the incident as part of a broader study on POW experiences in America during World War II. Through the Freedom of Information Act, he managed to obtain partially redacted copies of the original investigation files. What he found suggested that the military inquiry had been far more extensive than publicly acknowledged. According to Dr. Blackwood's notes, investigators had been particularly interested in the stretch of road where Private Morris reported encountering fog. This area, part of what locals called the Devil's Elbow, due to its sharp curves along the Gasconade River, had a curious history. During the 1930s, multiple travelers had reported disorientation and lost time while driving through the area at night. These incidents had been documented by a WPA folklore project, but were dismissed as rural superstition. The Devil's Elbow area had once been the site of a mining operation in the late 1800s. The mine had been abandoned after a cave-in killed 17 workers in 1897. Local legend held that the area was cursed or haunted as a result. More practically, the abandoned mine shafts created unusual air currents that might explain the localized fog banks that frequently formed there. More concretely, Dr. Blackwood discovered that soil and residue samples had been taken from the interior of all 3 transport trucks. The analysis results remained classified, but a handwritten note in the margin of one report read, "Chemical composition inconsistent with known substances. Recommendation: consult Division S." Division S was not identified in any of the accessible documents. Blackwood's attempts to learn more about this unit were met with official denials of its existence. However, through interviews with retired military personnel, he developed a theory that Division S might have been a code name for a specialized scientific intelligence unit tasked with investigating unusual phenomena that might have military applications. Perhaps most significantly, Blackwood uncovered evidence that the 30 prisoners selected for transfer had something in common that hadn't been noted in the original investigation. While none were high-ranking officers or known security risks, all 30 had been captured within a 48-hour period in the same approximate location, a small village outside Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. All had been part of the same German regiment, the 10th Panzer Division, though assigned to different companies. This connection raised new questions. What had these 30 men experienced or witnessed in Tunisia that might have made them of special interest? Why were they being transferred as a group more than 9 months after their capture? And most intriguingly, why was their transfer classified as routine when the selection process had clearly been anything but random? Blackwood published his preliminary findings in the Journal of Military History in late 1969. 3 weeks after publication, his university office was broken into. The only items taken were his research materials related to the convoy incident. Blackwood reported receiving anonymous phone calls warning him to leave the past buried. He abandoned his research shortly thereafter and refused to discuss the case publicly for the remainder of his career. The story might have ended there, filed away with other wartime curiosities, had it not been for a discovery made during the construction of a highway expansion in 1972. Workers clearing land approximately 20 miles southeast of Rolla, Missouri, roughly where Hargrove had claimed the convoy made its unscheduled stop, uncovered a mass grave containing the remains of multiple individuals. Initial forensic examinations suggested the bodies had been buried for several decades. Work was halted, and the site was cordoned off by state police. Within 24 hours, federal authorities arrived and assumed jurisdiction over the site. All construction workers and local law enforcement were removed from the area. A temporary facility was erected around the excavation, obscuring it from view. Local newspapers reported that the remains were believed to be from a previously unknown pioneer cemetery and had been relocated for proper reburial. No further information was ever officially released about the discovery. Construction resumed after a 2-week delay, with the site now paved over by the new highway. However, one of the construction workers who requested anonymity when interviewed by a local radio station in 1976 claimed that he had seen at least 15 sets of remains before being removed from the site. He described them as all male, all wearing what looked like rotted uniforms of some kind. The worker's account included a detail that he found particularly disturbing: the way they were lying, not like normal buried bodies, all neat in a row. These were scattered like they'd just dropped where they stood, and their positions, arms outstretched, mouths open, like they were screaming when they died. Attempts by journalists to verify this account were unsuccessful. Records of the excavation, if they existed, were not made public. The identity of the remains was never officially confirmed, leaving open the possibility that they might have been the missing German prisoners, or something else entirely. In 1978, a retired military intelligence officer named James Forrestal, no relation to the former Secretary of Defense, self-published a memoir titled Classified Truths: My Years in Military Intelligence, 1941 to 1955. In a brief chapter, Forrestal claimed to have been part of a specialized unit that investigated unusual incidents on American soil during the war. According to Forrestal, the case of the missing prisoners was designated Priority Level Alpha and was personally reviewed by the Secretary of War. He claimed that the official explanation of an escape was fabricated to conceal the truth, that the military had no explanation for what had happened. Forrestal wrote that he had interviewed Captain Reeves several times in the months following the incident. During these sessions, Reeves allegedly revealed that he had experienced approximately 30 minutes of missing time during the journey. The convoy had entered the foggy area around 01 hours, but according to the vehicle logs, they didn't emerge until 01:32, despite the affected area being less than a mile long. Even more troubling was Reeves's apparent deterioration during these interviews. According to Forrestal, He began our first session as a model officer, clear-eyed, articulate, determined to understand what had happened to his men. By our fourth meeting, he was a changed man, haggard, jumpy, prone to long silences, followed by bursts of almost manic energy. During our final interview, he confided that he was experiencing vivid nightmares. "I see them," he told me, "all 30 of them standing in a circle, but they're not men anymore. They're just outlines, filled with light, and they're trying to tell me something, but I can't hear them because of the sound." When Forrestal asked what sound he meant, Reeves reportedly replied, "The sound from the fog, like music, but wrong somehow, like it's being played on instruments that shouldn't exist." More disturbing was Forrestal's claim that all 8 convoy personnel began experiencing severe health problems in the weeks following the incident. Symptoms included chronic insomnia, unexplained fevers, and what medical records described as nervous exhaustion. Captain Reeves was hospitalized in March 1944 with symptoms resembling radiation poisoning, though this diagnosis was never officially confirmed. He died in April 1944, his death attributed to complications from pneumonia. According to Forrestal, the other convoy members fared little better. Private First Class Morris suffered a mental breakdown in May 1944 and was institutionalized. Staff Sergeant Hargrove developed unexplained lesions on his skin and was medically discharged. The others experienced various chronic conditions that defied conventional diagnosis. By 1946, Forrestal claimed 5 of the 8 men were dead, and the remaining 3 lived as physical and mental shadows of their former selves. Forrestal's book was largely dismissed as sensationalism by mainstream historians. The Department of Defense issued a statement describing it as fiction presented as fact, and noted that many of Forrestal's claimed credentials could not be verified. The book went out of print quickly and became a curiosity sought by collectors of wartime memorabilia. Yet pieces of evidence continued to emerge over the decades, suggesting there was more to the story than official denials indicated. In 1983, a retired nurse named Margaret Collins came forward with an account of her time serving at the military hospital at Fort Leonard Wood. Collins claimed that in the early morning hours of December 13, 1943, the hospital had received an urgent call to prepare for multiple incoming patients. Staff were told to expect severe cases of unknown exposure. According to Collins, several areas of the hospital were cleared and designated as restricted. Medical personnel without specific security clearance, including Collins herself, were removed from these areas. However, before being reassigned, Collins observed the arrival of Captain Reeves and his men. She described them as walking under their own power but appearing disoriented. What struck her most was that all 8 men had an unusual pallor and were repeating the same phrase. They were just gone. Collins claimed that a specialized medical team arrived from Washington, D.C. later that day. The convoy personnel were placed in isolation, and all regular hospital staff were barred from contact with them. Collins never learned the nature of their condition or treatment, but she recalled that the specialized team brought unusual equipment that she had never seen before, including what appeared to be Geiger counters and other radiation detection devices. They tested everything, Collins recalled. The men's uniforms, their personal effects, even samples of their hair and nails. They were looking for something specific, but none of us were told what it was. The whole thing was treated with a level of secrecy that seemed excessive, even for wartime. Collins's account aligned with certain aspects of Forrestal's claims, particularly regarding the physical condition of the convoy personnel and the suggestion that they might have been exposed to some form of radiation. However, without access to the men's medical records or confirmation from other hospital staff, her testimony remained anecdotal. The most compelling evidence came to light in 1991 when historian Robert Miller discovered a series of photographs in the National Archives that had been misfiled among records related to Camp Forest construction projects. The photos, dated December 13, 1943, showed the interior of the 3 transport trucks after their arrival at Fort Leonard Wood. The images confirmed aspects of the original investigation reports. The trucks were indeed empty, with no signs of forced exit. The securing chains were intact, but one detail not mentioned in any of the released documents was clearly visible. A fine, powdery substance coated the floor and benches of each truck. Handwritten notes on the back of the photos identified it as residue of unknown origin. The residue appeared to have a distinctive pattern, concentrated in certain areas, particularly around where prisoners would have been seated, but absent from others. In several photos, measuring devices were visible, suggesting the substance was being analyzed in situ. Other photos showed men in what appeared to be protective gear collecting samples. Miller attempted to locate additional photographs or analysis of this substance, but found that all related materials had been removed from the archives. His requests for information under the Freedom of Information Act were denied on grounds of national security, an unusual response for documents related to a nearly 50-year-old incident. Miller's findings reignited interest in the case among a small community of military historians and researchers of unusual phenomena. Some suggested the residue might have been a chemical agent used to incapacitate the prisoners, possibly as part of a covert operation to extract them for specialized interrogation. Others proposed more exotic theories, including the possibility that the substance was physical evidence of some kind of unprecedented event. In 1997, the case took another unexpected turn when a former German soldier named Karl Miller, living in Canada since 1951, claimed to have information about the missing prisoners. Miller, who had served in the 10th Panzer Division in North Africa, stated that the 30 men selected for transfer had all been part of a specialized unit attached to the German Afrika Korps. According to Muller, this unit had been involved in the recovery and analysis of an unidentified craft that crashed in the Tunisian desert in January 1943. The nature of this craft was never made clear to the regular soldiers, but Miller claimed it was neither German nor Allied in origin. The 30 men who would later disappear from the American convoy had all been directly involved in recovering materials from the crash site. They were sworn to secrecy, Miller told a Canadian newspaper. But rumors spread. The object was like nothing any of us had seen before. Not an aircraft as we understood them. It generated intense heat and light when approached. Several men suffered burns. Others reported hearing voices in their heads. When American forces captured the area, these 30 men were immediately segregated from other prisoners. We assumed they were being interrogated about what they had seen. We never expected they would simply vanish. Miller's account might have been dismissed as the invention of an aging veteran were it not for one verifiable detail. Military records confirmed that a special recovery unit had indeed been attached to the 10th Panzer Division during operations near Kasserine Pass. The unit's specific purpose was not documented, but its existence lent a degree of credibility to Miller's claims. Furthermore, declassified intelligence reports from 1943 indicated that American forces had been searching for something specific in the Kasserine area after driving back German forces. The nature of this search was not specified, but it involved personnel from the Office of Scientific Research and Development, a civilian agency that coordinated wartime scientific research. Miller's story connected several previously disparate elements: the selection criteria for the 30 prisoners, the unusual interest in their transfer by what Hoffman had called Dep W, and the subsequent classification of all records related to the incident. It suggested that the prisoners might have been transported to Fort Leonard Wood not for labor allocation, but for specialized debriefing about something they had witnessed in Tunisia, something of significant scientific or intelligence value. By the early 2000s, most of the principals involved in the case had passed away. Captain Reeves in 1944, Staff Sergeant Hargrove in 1968, Major Ellington in 1975, Dr. Blackwood in 1988. The incident gradually transitioned from active mystery to historical footnote. Occasionally referenced in books about wartime anomalies, but rarely given serious scholarly attention. The fog of time settled over the case, obscuring details and complicating research efforts. Documents disappeared from archives. Witnesses died without recording their testimonies. The physical landscape itself changed, with new highways and development erasing the exact route taken by the convoy. What remained were fragments, partial records, second-hand accounts, and unanswered questions. The most recent development came in 2014, when a cache of documents was discovered during renovation of a former military administration building in St. Louis. Among these papers was a partial transcript of an interrogation conducted with Private Joseph Danzig, who had been in the rear jeep during the convoy. The transcript, dated January 7, 1944, revealed that investigators had been particularly interested in a specific 17-minute period during the journey, from 01:15 to 01:32, when the convoy was passing through the foggy area near Mark Twain National Forest. Danzig repeatedly stated that he had no clear memory of this period. When pressed, he said only that he recalled a sound like singing, but not human singing, and lights that moved like they were alive. The interrogator, identified only as Major H., appeared particularly interested in whether Danzig had observed any aircraft or unusual aerial phenomena during this period. Danzig insisted he had not seen any conventional aircraft, but described seeing columns of light through the fog that appeared to be searching for something. When asked if these lights might have been searchlights from a nearby military installation, Danzig replied, "No, sir. These weren't coming from the ground up. They were coming from above, pointing down." The most unsettling portion of the transcript concerned Danzig's description of the prisoner's behavior during this period, as observed through the rear window of the truck. Major H: "Did you have visual contact with the prisoners at any point during the incident?" Danzig: "Yes, sir. I could see into the back of the third truck. Not clearly, but enough." Major H: "And what did you observe?" Danzig: "They were all standing, sir. All 30 of them in all 3 trucks. Standing perfectly still, their heads were tilted back, looking up, like they were listening to something." Major H: "Listening to what?" Danzig: "I don't know, sir. The singing, maybe, but they all knew it was coming. That's what bothers me the most. They knew before we did." Major H: "Knew what was coming, Private?" Danzig: "Whatever took them, sir." The final pages of the transcript contain a notation that Danzig was to be transferred to Facility 47B for extended observation and treatment. No record of such a facility has been found in conventional military archives, and Danzig's service record shows only that he was honorably discharged in June 1944 for medical reasons. The discovery of the Danzig transcript provided the first contemporaneous account suggesting that the prisoner's disappearance might have involved some form of external intervention, something beyond a conventional escape or covert military operation. It aligned with elements of Hargrove's later testimony about lights and unusual sounds, lending credibility to accounts that had previously been dismissed. Further corroboration came from an unexpected source in 2016, when the grandson of Private First Class Morris discovered a sealed envelope among his grandfather's effects. The envelope, marked "To be opened after my death," contained a handwritten account of the convoy incident that Morris had prepared in 1967 but never shared. Morris's account largely aligned with the official record, but included details that had never been made public. He described how, upon entering the foggy area, the truck engines had simultaneously sputtered and almost stalled. The dashboard instruments had fluctuated wildly, with the compasses spinning in circles. Most significantly, he claimed that as they emerged from the fog, he had looked back and seen what appeared to be a tear in the air itself, a vertical line of intense light that briefly illuminated the road behind them before disappearing. "I knew something terrible had happened," Morris wrote. "I could feel it in my bones. But when Captain Reeves asked if everyone was all right, I said yes, we all did. None of us wanted to admit that something was wrong because we didn't understand what it was. By the time we reached Fort Leonard Wood and discovered the prisoners were gone, it was too late to go back, and maybe that was for the best. Some doors shouldn't be reopened once they've closed. Morris's account concluded with a statement that seemed to reference his subsequent mental health challenges. They say I had a breakdown in '44. That's their word for it. I know what really happened. The thing we drove through that night, it didn't just take the prisoners, it took pieces of all of us. I've been incomplete ever since, and I'm one of the lucky ones. In 2019, a retired Air Force colonel named Richard Hayes published an article in a military history journal suggesting that the convoy incident might have been connected to early experiments in electromagnetic countermeasures. Hayes proposed that the German prisoners had been exposed to some form of radiation or electromagnetic field in Tunisia that made them valuable research subjects. The convoy route, he suggested, might have been deliberately planned to pass through an area where similar electromagnetic conditions could be recreated. Hayes's theory was speculative but grounded in documented historical context. By 1943, both Allied and Axis powers were investigating various forms of directed energy technologies, including radar jammers and other electromagnetic devices. The possibility that the prisoners had been exposed to such technology, either accidentally or as part of a planned experiment, could explain both their selection for transfer and the subsequent classification of all related records. What Hayes's theory failed to explain, however, was the actual mechanism of the prisoners' disappearance. Even the most advanced electromagnetic technology of the era could not have facilitated the removal of 30 men from locked trucks without leaving evidence. A competing theory emerged from Dr. Elena Vasquez, a physicist with an interest in historical anomalies. In a 2021 paper, she proposed that the convoy might have encountered what she termed a localized space-time anomaly, a rare and poorly understood phenomenon in which the normal laws of physics temporarily break down. Such anomalies, she suggested, might explain reports of missing time, unusual fog, electrical disturbances, and even the disappearance of physical objects or persons. Vasquez's theory was met with skepticism from mainstream scientists, who pointed out that no verified instances of such anomalies have been documented under controlled conditions. Critics suggested she was applying modern theoretical physics concepts to explain what was more likely a conventional, if unusual, historical event. What actually happened to those 30 German prisoners on a cold December night in 1943 remains unknown. The official explanation, that they somehow orchestrated a mass escape from locked trucks during a non-stop journey, strains credibility. The alternative explanations range from the plausible to the fantastic. Some historians suggest the prisoners may have been secretly executed, perhaps in retaliation for German atrocities in Europe. This theory, however, fails to explain why these particular 30 men would have been selected, or why the American military would have gone to such elaborate lengths to obscure their fate. It also contradicts America's generally good record of POW treatment during the war. Others propose that the prisoners were actually high-value individuals, scientists or intelligence assets, who were removed from the normal POW system for specialized interrogation. This would explain the classification of records, but not the apparent confusion of the convoy personnel or their subsequent health issues. It also leaves open the question of how such a removal could have been accomplished without the convoy personnel's knowledge or cooperation. A variation of this theory suggests that the entire incident was an elaborately staged deception, that the prisoners were meant to disappear under mysterious circumstances to conceal their extraction for intelligence purposes. The convoy personnel's confusion and health problems could have been side effects of drugs administered to ensure they would not remember details of a planned stop or transfer. However, this would have required a level of complexity and risk that seems disproportionate to the potential intelligence value of 30 ordinary German soldiers. The most unsettling possibility is that something truly inexplicable occurred on that isolated stretch of Ozark Mountain Road, something beyond the conventional understanding of reality that prevailed in 1943. The fog, the missing time, the singing reported by Danzig, the residue in the trucks, these elements suggest an encounter of a kind that military authorities were ill-equipped to comprehend or explain. In the absence of definitive answers, the case of the 30 missing prisoners has become a kind of Rorschach test. Those inclined toward conspiracy theories see evidence of government malfeasance. Those with an interest in the paranormal find suggestions of supernatural intervention. Skeptics point to the fragmentary nature of the evidence and the unreliability of aging memories. The geographical setting itself contributes to the mystery. The Ozark Mountains have long been associated with folkloric anomalies, unexplained lights, sudden fogs, inexplicable sounds. Indigenous peoples considered certain areas within the region to be places where the boundary between worlds was thin. Early European settlers reported unusual phenomena that they attributed to supernatural forces. In this context, the convoy incident can be seen as part of a larger pattern of unexplained events tied to specific locations. What remains undisputed is that 30 men who existed in military records, who had names, faces, and histories, vanished without trace while in U.S. military custody. Their disappearance was investigated, classified, and ultimately consigned to the shadows of history. The families of these men never learned their fate. Under wartime conditions, notification of German next of kin was not a priority for American authorities. When the war ended and POWs were repatriated, these 30 names simply appeared on lists of those missing in action. Their unusual disappearance from American custody never officially acknowledged. One former German POW, Heinrich Weber, who had been held at Camp Forest but was not part of the transferred group, provided a final, haunting detail in a 1995 interview with a German historical journal. Weber claimed that in the days before the transfer, the 30 selected men had displayed unusual behavior. They kept to themselves, Weber recalled. They would gather in corners of the compound, speaking in whispers. Some seemed afraid. Others seemed almost eager, as if anticipating something. One of them, a man named Kraus, told me the night before they left, "We are going to meet them again." When I asked who he meant, he just smiled and said, "The ones from the light." I thought he was talking nonsense. Now, I'm not so sure. The stretch of highway that now covers the route taken by the convoy on that December night continues to carry travelers safely to their destinations. Few who drive it are aware of what reportedly transpired there in the winter of 1943. The towns along the route, Salem, Rolla, Waynesville, have grown and changed with the passing decades. The forests remain, silent witnesses to whatever truth lies behind the mystery. Some locals claim that unusual phenomena still occur in the area. Electronics malfunction without explanation. GPS systems show momentary errors. On cold, clear nights, unexpected patches of fog sometimes form along short stretches of road. Most travelers pass through without incident, but occasionally someone reports a brief disorientation, a strange sound, or a momentary sense that something is watching from the dense forest that borders the highway. These reports are typically dismissed as the power of suggestion. People who have heard the story of the convoy imagining connections to ordinary occurrences. And perhaps that is all they are. Or perhaps they are echoes of whatever happened on that December night, ripples still spreading from an event that defied conventional explanation. Perhaps somewhere in still classified military archives, the full explanation exists. Perhaps the truth died with Captain Reeves and his men, or with the 30 prisoners who never reached their destination. Or perhaps, as some have suggested, the answer lies not in documents or testimonies, but in the nature of reality itself, in the possibility that there are moments when the familiar boundaries of the world grow thin, and people can step through, willingly or not, into something else entirely. What is certain is that on December 13, 1943, 3 trucks arrived at Fort Leonard Wood. They had departed Camp Forest with 30 prisoners. They arrived empty. And in the more than 8 decades since that night, No definitive explanation has ever been provided for one of the most disturbing disappearances in American military history. In the words attributed to Major Ellington in his final report before the case was classified, we are left with a mystery that challenges the foundation of our understanding. 30 men did not simply vanish, yet that is precisely what the evidence suggests occurred. If we cannot determine what happened, we must at least have the courage to admit that something happened, something beyond our current capacity to explain. The roads through the Ozarks are wider now, better lit, more frequently traveled, but on cold winter nights when fog settles in the valleys and visibility drops to mere feet, some drivers report a strange sensation, a moment of disorientation, a flicker in the radio, a brief loss of time. And they wonder, if only fleetingly, what else might be moving through the mist, unseen and unexplained. For those who have studied the case in depth, one question remains paramount. Was the convoy incident an isolated anomaly, or evidence of something larger, a pattern of unexplained events that continues to this day? The 30 German prisoners who vanished that night may have been neither the first nor the last to encounter whatever waits in certain remote places at certain times, under certain conditions. Their story serves as a reminder that even in an age of scientific certainty and technological mastery, there remain mysteries at the edges of our understanding, events that challenge our assumptions about the nature of reality and our place within it. For some, this is a disturbing thought. For others, it suggests that the world is more complex, more wondrous, and perhaps more dangerous than we typically acknowledge. As for the 30 men who entered the fog but never emerged, their fate remains one of the war's most enduring mysteries, a footnote in official histories, but a gaping void for those who seek to understand what truly happened on that cold December night in 1943, when a convoy of trucks arrived at their destination inexplicably and impossibly empty.